It's too late to apologize. I'm Stella and I'm here with a book review, and today I'm going to be talking about George Orwell's 1984. So if you follow me on Goodreads, you know that I gave this book a 5. Hit myself with this book. I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely love this book. It's a pretty cool edition of it that I found too, which for those of you who don't know, 1984 is a dystopian fiction about a world in an indistinct future where the story is about Winston, and he works in the party's propaganda machine. He works for the government, and his job is to go over documents and files and to correct files so that what happens or what the government has predicted is going to happen, or their thoughts of what is going to happen, is correct with what actually does happen. So his job is to fabricate all news, and not fabricate, but to adjust all news and all documents so that they are compliant with what the government wants everyone to believe and think of them. And so, and this is where we get the whole, name of Big Brother. So this is where it comes from, and a whole bunch of different sort of what have become cliches nowadays is like originated from this novel. Things like doublethink and unorthodoxy and all that, those sort of terms really originated in 1984 in this novel. So, and really the blurb on the back of this book puts it really, really well. In Orwell's frightening vision of the future, society is under the control of Big Brother. Every aspect of life is closely monitored, while any hint of unorthodoxy is ruthlessly suppressed by the thought police. The Ministry of Truth, where Winston Smith works, is the party's propaganda machine. A secret rebel, Winston yearns for liberty and finds new hope when he falls in love with the earthy, uncomplicated Julia. Instead, he discovers a nightmare world of terror where the price of freedom is betrayal. So this was such a good book on so many different levels. The writing style was really interesting. Orwell has this very almost streamlined, simplistic use of prose, but then at the same point, there's really great examples of the beauty of his writing and his works. What really spoke to me, and what the clincher for me was in this novel, was really when we get to understand Winston. I believe the beginning of this novel was really hard for me to get into, because Winston in the beginning is really unrelatable in my eyes, because we sort of were experiencing the world that he lives in, and it's crazy to think of the world that he does live in and how he has to live in it and what he needs to do to fit into this world so that he can be free, as free as he can be inside this very controlling world. And so there's all this anger inside him, and I will say that there is a point in here where Winston ends up having really horrible thoughts of Julia when he first sees her. They don't even know each other at this point, but Julia is a young, beautiful woman who is a part of this sort of chaste club. It is very encouraged for women to be a part of this chaste club because, then they're seen in a very positive light. So Julia is a part of this club, and she wears this sash so that everybody can identify her as being a part of this club. And there's this moment where Winston has this violent urge to want to murder her simply because she won't sleep with him. Even though he's never said hi to her, or they don't even know each other, but he has this thought that he wants to murder her in very cruel and terrible ways simply because she won't sleep with him. And so I found myself really at odds at that point with Winston's character. And of course I knew that, his rage wasn't at all necessarily because of Julia and because she was chaste, but it was because of, anger at his whole entire situation. But there were lots of different ways that he could have expressed that sort of violent urge that about his situation and how frustrated he was with his situation. There were so many other opportunities that he could have expressed that rage, like during the 5-minute hate, while he's being watched in his own home by Big Brother, while he has to mind everything he says, every facial expression. There's so many opportunities that he could have expressed this violence, but where it came out was in sort of sexual frustration. I think it's insulting to men because it sort of paints them as people who can't control their sexual urges, and I don't believe that accurate of men at all. So anyways, after that, Winston's character really progresses in my mind, because I'm really wondering what his motive is in this entire story. And then we really come to understand that his motive is really to connect with another human person and with another human being and with a woman. And he wants to love someone and something, and he wants something that's real instead of just artificial and just a game and a play that's put on so that Big Brother is fine with the way that you're living your life. Because he had been married previous and they separated, and the only reason his wife was in this marriage was to have a child, and even the act of being physically intimate was a horrifying ordeal for her. So he's really had this sort of not had any connection to any other soul. And so when I finally realized, and through his own narrative, that what he was really searching for was a human connection, I really found I could then at that point found sort of redeemed in my eyes, because I could totally understand him from that aspect. And so it progresses, the story goes on, and he meets Julia, and they end up falling in love with each other. Through finding love with Julia, he becomes more unhappy with how he has to pretend his life is. And so then with this unrest that he finds, he wants to find some sort of rebel cell, and he wants to rebel, and he wants to do anything possible to rebel. So anyway, I don't want to ruin the entire story because I really highly recommend this book, but there is a point where he does find a rebel cell, and they give him a book which basically just explains why the society is the way that it is. And there was just so many eerie parallels to our own world. And I mean, it was just an amazing read. Really, that first bit of the book that, and for those of you who have read it, you know exactly what I'm talking about, but when he goes through that manual and he's reading about why the government is at war with other governments and why everything is always changed all the time and why things are the way that they are, it was just this sort of thought-provoking moment for me, and it was so good. And spoiler alert, for those who haven't read it yet and want to read it, you can stop this video right now because I'm about to get into some spoiler stuff. But even after Winston is captured by the Thought Police and he's being tortured, one thing I will definitely say is that I found that during the torture scenes, I would have felt more for Winston had they explained a little bit more about how he was being tortured. All we know is that there's a setting and they're turning it up and turning it down. I'm not sure if he's being electrocuted or what's happening to him, but and it's very almost removed from the perspective is very removed, and you don't really feel in touch with Winston as he's going through this torture, those torture scenes. I would have liked to have felt the torture a little bit more, because at times it was kind of confusing as to what was even happening. And then just the whole he was really proud of the fact that he hadn't betrayed Julia yet, and then in the end his greatest fear overcomes him, and then he ends up betraying Julia. And in the end, everyone betrays everyone. Everybody has their limits. And when they do set him free, because they've broken him and they've set him free, he becomes an alcoholic, basically, drinking away his sorrows, and he ends up seeing Julia afterwards, after they've both been captured and released, and how they're not the same person anymore, and that feeling of love that they had for each other is gone, and there's just sort of this broken thing left in its wake. And how in the end Big Brother ends up crushing Winston. And how I read this actually with a fellow reader a fellow writer friend of mine, and he was really disappointed at the ending and how Winston succumbed to Big Brother. And I really found that I quite enjoyed that part of the story, because in my own mind, it left me much more defiant, and it really ignited that sort of rebel inside me, and really that I would still fight for this, for, you know, the cause and stuff. So, you know, whereas I don't think I would have felt that as strongly if Winston had succeeded in his rebel cause or anything, and if he hadn't broken out the end, it just, it made the frailty of humanity a very tangible thing in the end. And so that's what I really liked, because it was really honest, I think, because, you know, we would like to think that, you know, we wouldn't crumble under something as terrible as torture, when in reality, we all would, you know, we all have our limits and things. And so I really liked that very honest look at that. And so, and then and in the same point, it really made me, you know, it made me really want to stick it to Big Brother at the end as well. So I really loved this novel. It was so incredibly good. And I remember thinking, so earlier in the year, I also read Animal Farm. And Animal Farm, I believe I rated like a 3 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it, but it was okay. And I know a lot of people raved about Animal Farm and about how amazing it was. But after I read 1984, it really sort of illuminated why I didn't enjoy Animal Farm as much. I really do enjoy the character-driven story, whereas Animal Farm was really a story being told, and it was a very good story being told, but you don't have that connection to any of the characters because it's being told in omniscient third person, and you don't, you know, it doesn't follow any one character. And whereas with 1984, with it, you know, following Winston, you know, they're similar in tone. It made all the difference for me, and I absolutely love 1984. I would recommend it to everybody, and that everybody needs to read this book. One of the first books you can see like all my sticky notes as I was reading through it, that I actually tabbed a whole bunch of stuff. There's this really interesting part that I was just looking through right now where Winston confesses that when he first saw Julia that he wanted to rape and murder her, which was a moment that I mentioned earlier in the video. And Julia's reaction is to laugh at it. And I'm like, how, that's not realistic, I don't think, in any way, shape, or form. I mean, maybe, like, if some man that I just met told me that, I'd be running out of that field faster than you could blink. I'd be like, gone. Sort of another interesting thought was there was a moment where Julia mentions that she hates other women. And there's this really, I find it interesting because I find a lot of women share this same sentiment. And I know that at some point that I also had that feeling and sentiment where I really found that I was different than a lot of women, and that women were annoying to a certain extent. And really what's happening is that you are not getting to know any women. You are judging all women you're painting all women with the same brush, and what you're doing is you're just judging women and you're not even knowing them. And even in this scenario, how could Julia have even known these women that she's saying she's hating? And perhaps all these women had their own minds just like Julia did. She's just going along and playing along, but really she has her own thoughts inside that she keeps buried, just like Winston does. And how are we judging anyone then? Because who knows who's having these thoughts? I don't know. It was really fascinating. And then the really interesting part was when Winston meets up with the rebels, and they ask him all the questions about what he's willing to do for the rebel cause, whether he was willing to kill innocent people, and, you know, on and on and on. They ask him if he's ready to lie and to cheat and to murder and to do anything that was asked of him. And even without having any explanation as to why any of these acts needed to be done, and he agreed to all of those, was really a moment where I felt, you know, it was a terrible thing for Winston and for Julia both to agree to that, because how is that any different than what Big Brother is doing? You know, you are just acting without any knowledge as to why why you're doing anything. You just have to agree with it and go along with it. And how is that any different from the control of Big Brother? So, and that was really interesting. And I think what's an interesting idea was how Winston really perceived Julia's character. And he really assumes that Julia swallows everything that Big Brother says, even though she knows, and she hasn't said that everything that Big Brother says, and she knows that everything Big Brother says is a lie. And yet, Winston just assumes that she's swallowing everything because she's not angry about it, or that she doesn't want to actively do something about it, and so she's just swallowing it. And it's very different from just swallowing what Big Brother is saying, because she knows that it's all lies. She's not taking it to heart. She just knows how she needs to act to survive in this world of 1984. And so, it's very different thought than what Winston is, because he kind of, it seems like in his perception of Julia that he sort of puts her down in that sense, like oh, she doesn't get it. She gets it. She just doesn't care. She knows that it won't change, and there's nothing that she can personally do to change it, so she doesn't care about it. But she knows, which I think is a different thing. I don't know. I think that's different. And then I found what was really interesting at the end was Winston and him drinking gin, even though he hated gin, and how it was just like life. He just continues on in this life, even though he hates it. And it's not what he wants, but he continues on with it. You just drink it because it's there, And so there was I just absolutely fell in love with this book, and it will definitely be a book that I will read again at some point in time. But anyways, if you've read 1984, let me know what your thoughts were. Have you read any interesting dystopian fiction? I am a huge lover of dystopian fiction. And let me know. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!